of the fantasy football season. And here's a few kickers I looked at on the waiver wire this week. The first guy, Greg Joseph of the Minnesota Vikings. So Greg Joseph, a lot of people were losing patience with him, including me, over the last few weeks. Week 2 at Philly, 1 point. Week 3 versus Detroit, 4 fantasy points. But week 4 in London versus the Saints, 14 fantasy points, 2 20 to 29 yarders, a 30 to a 39 yarder, 2 40 to 49 yarders, an extra point, and an extra point miss. So right here, week 5, another pretty good matchup versus the Chicago Bears. And they don't got to worry about the weather. It's in Minnesota, indoor ball game, obviously, and that bodes well for Greg Joseph. So right now, he did get dropped in 11% of fantasy leagues coming into the week. But right now, he's still out there in 54% of leagues. And maybe this is the type of game he needed to get back on track. And he's a kicker I look to get this week. The next guy is Marr of the Dallas Cowboys. So Marr, he's playing good football for this Cowboy team in his third stint in Dallas. And right now, he got added in 19% of fantasy leagues from last week to this week. And right here, he's got 3 out of the first 4 ball games this season. Double-digit fantasy points. Week 2 versus Cincinnati, 12 fantasy points with 250-plus yarders, 2 extra points. Week 3 at the Giants, 220 to 29 yards, a 40 to 49 yarder, and 2 extra points. And Week 4 versus Washington, a 50-plus yarder, 40-49 yarder, and 2 29 yarders with an extra point and an extra point miss. So right here, Week 5 at the Rams, we could see more of the same where this Cowboy team could get in the red zone, but not finish a lot of drives with touchdowns. And the long boot of Marr could kick maybe a 40 or 50 yarder in this one. So right now, available still in 79% of fantasy leagues. And he's a kicker I look to get on the wire this week. The next guy, Graham Gano of the New York Giants. I mentioned Gano last week as an ad, and he continues to put up good points for this Giant team. This is a Giant offense that don't finish a lot of drives in the end zone. And the last 3 weeks here has been double-digit fantasy days here for Graham Gano. Week 2 versus the Panthers, 230 to 39 yarders with 250-plus yarders and an extra point. Week 3 versus Dallas, 40 to a 49 yarder with 250-plus yarders, an extra point. And Week 4 versus the Bears in tough kicking conditions in a rainy, wet ball game, 240, 49 yarders, and 2 extra points. So right here, Week 5, a ball game versus the Green Bay Packers in London, which good kick is that atmosphere, even though obviously there's a hole in the roof over there where they're half in, half outdoors, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, Graham Gano, he's getting opportunities. Like I said, this Giant team's not finishing drives, and he's available right now in 83% of fantasy leagues, and there's no reason why he shouldn't be owned in most 10 or 12 team fantasy leagues. The next guy is Mason Crosby of the Green Bay Packers. Crosby available right now in 95% of fantasy leagues. And the next couple weeks, he has good matchups with this Packer team. They should score more points and be in the red zone more with the Giants, Jets, and Washington coming up. So right here, the last couple weeks here for Crosby, Week 2 versus Chicago, 9 fantasy points, 20 to a 29 yarder with a 40, 49 yarder, 3 extra points. Week 3 at Tampa, only 2 extra points. And Week 4 versus New England, 230 to 39 yarders with 3 extra points. So what a good schedule coming up the next 3 weeks here for Mason Crosby, and a guy available in 95% of fantasy leagues, and a guy who I think is going to get more opportunities as Rodgers gets a little more comfortable with his offense here. He's a kicker I look to add on the wire this week, and the 5th and final kicker I look to add is Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Steelers here, tough loss versus the New York Jets in a ball game they blew in the second half where they were up 20 to 10. But Chris Boswell, he's kicking the football well this season. Week 2 versus New England, 8 fantasy points, 30 to a 39 yarder with 50-plus yarder. Week 3 at Cleveland, a 30 to a 39 yarder with 2 extra points. And Week 4 versus the Jets, 2 50-plus yarders and 2 extra points. And right here, Week 5, they're going to have to keep up with this Buffalo team somehow, even though I don't see it going down in this ball game where Chris Boswell is going to have a few opportunities at minimum, I think, to try to keep at least some points on the board with this Buffalo offense. And right now, this Steelers offense, they're in a transition from Trubisky to Pickett, it looks like. And Boswell right now is available in 83% of fantasy leagues, and he's putting up numbers this season. So there's no reason why he shouldn't be owned in 12-team leagues or deeper. So that's a few kickers I looked at on the wire here for Week 5 of the fantasy football season.